Sony Pictures is kind of having an existential crisis when it comes to Spider-Man lately. They announced that they were going to be making Spider-Man 4 like years ago, and nothing has happened. We haven't got a single update since Spider-Man No Way Home, and with rumors constantly in the air about Sony trying to rush Spider-Man 4 to production, and the latest rumor right now is that the Venom symbiote might make an appearance, it's kind of got me wondering, well, what are they planning on doing with Venom? Venom: The Last Dance has been confirmed to be the final Tom Hardy film, and recently with Morbius and Madam Web, it's becoming quite clear that Sony Pictures is canceling their spin-off films. So sorry El Muerto fans, you're never getting that movie. The biggest and craziest rumor right now is that Seth Rogen, who has produced many great animated films like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Invincible, is currently working on a R-rated Venom film for Sony Animation, the same team behind Spider-Verse. And with all these cancellations, with Tom Hardy's Venom film being the final one, with Spider-Man 4 being rushed into production, it's got me wondering, well, what are they doing with Venom? And how is this all going to tie into the Tom Holland trilogy that they're currently working on? On this episode of Atomic Vision, I'm going to uncover who is going to be Venom in the MCU. Now, before we get to any of the crazier ideas, we're going to go down the usual suspects. And you can't make a Venom video without talking about the original Venom. So it wouldn't be crazy if the MCU uses Eddie Brock again. I know it's an extremely easy and safe choice, but maybe Sony and Marvel are looking at using Eddie Brock as a way to reboot the character and try to move away from the Tom Hardy version.
I am out of the Eddie closet!
Maybe they want to use it as an excuse to course correct, since the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 3 Venom was really weird and didn't fit into that film.
See you, chump. What the hell?
Maybe they want to be inspired by the animated series that used Venom, I think, the best in the traditional sense of the character, where he's just a bully at the Daily Bugle.
We call ourselves Venom.
Since the Tom Holland trilogy is rumored to be centered around him going to college, it wouldn't be that far of a stretch to imagine that Eddie Brock is just a colleague at school. And maybe instead of it just being a rivalry at the Daily Bugle, since in Spider-Man No Way Home, they've kind of made JJ this weird Alex Jones character, so it wouldn't really work to have the newspaper angle like in the old films or comics.
You serious?
Maybe Eddie Brock is just a college kid. Maybe he's a frat boy character. Maybe he's like a good friend and we go like the Spectacular Spider-Man route, where he's a beloved friend of Peter Parker. All I know is that if they use Eddie Brock, I just want him to do the same thing he used to do in the Spider-Man PS1 game.
Surf the web, surf the web.
Shut up, Brock. We don't have time.
But if you're gonna go the whole college angle, maybe you don't even use Eddie Brock. So our second suspect is a more recent one. What if Venom is Harry Osborn? He's a very popular choice right now since the PS5 game is one of the most sold PlayStation games in recent years. And it allows for an introduction to the Oscorp brand and Norman Osborn into the MCU proper. But this leads into like a bigger problem, and it's the fact that Spider-Man No Way Home has made it clear that Oscorp and Osborn don't exist in the MCU. So if you were to go this way, you would have to retcon that maybe Norman just didn't know, which is kind of a cop-out. But on the other hand, if you have Harry Osborn be Venom, and you follow that story route that they had just done where he's sick, and he's using the symbiote as a way to heal himself, that creates just an easier way for audiences to relate to the character instead of it just being the sidekick buddy of Spider-Man. And the cooler part is that if you do go this route, then you have an excuse to have Norman Osborn become the Green Goblin in a follow-up film, and to separate itself from the fact that they just used Goblin in No Way Home, they could go the ultimate route where this version of the Goblin in the MCU is the mutant version.
It's not after me.
Is that Green Goblin?
Why won't you quit?
But to close out the usual suspects here, the easiest one and probably the safest bet, even safer than Eddie Brock or Harry Osborn, is to use Mac Gargan, Scorpion, who they have basically introduced in the MCU in Spider-Man Homecoming, and then they've just practically abandoned him. He's still in a jail cell somewhere, just waiting. He obviously wants his revenge on Spider-Man, so that's a good motivation for the character. But if you wanted, you can kind of have this as a remix. In the comics, we know that Scorpion was created by J. Jonah Jameson as this Spider-Man killer, but eventually the suit attaches itself to Mac Gargan and it can't be taken off. So that's what makes Mac Gargan go nuts What if you use that same exact storyline, but instead of it being the Scorpion suit, you just use the Venom symbiote? And to me, that makes the most sense of any of the obvious choices. But let's get into some of the weirder picks. Some of the ones that people probably aren't thinking about as Venom in the MCU, and most of these picks are definitely controversial or too far out there. But since this is my video and this is Atomic Vision, why not? I think this is hilarious. What if the first version of Venom that we get in the MCU isn't even a guy? What if Venom is Black Cat? She has been Venom in the comics before, and people definitely want to see her in the MCU now that everyone has forgotten Peter Parker and MJ is no longer in his life, so Pete's alone. And it just makes sense from a romantic angle to introduce the character who is a bit too crazy for Peter in his life right now. And it'd be interesting to maybe tie those two storylines together in like some sort of remix, much like the Scorpion pitch that I had made. And somewhere along the line in the film, the relationship that Pete and Felicia have becomes toxic, almost to the point where it's not even a breakup anymore, it's straight up revenge. And that would be a pretty easy way to have Venom attach itself to another superhero character in the MCU that's not the easy or obvious choice. The only issue that I have is that people probably don't want Black Cat, a character that they've been waiting for years, to immediately be Venom. I can definitely see some backlash from this idea. But I'm just putting it out into the world. You never know. This might happen because Marvel really loves to do remixes of well-known storylines. I mean, Spider-Man No Way Home was literally inspired by one of the worst comics in Spider-Man history, and yet the movie is beloved by many. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that this could happen. My next pick, which I think is just too big for where Tom Holland's college storyline is going, but you never know. What if Venom isn't even a human being? What if Venom is Null, the god emperor of the symbiotes? And I think the easiest way that you can do this storyline, even though it's too crazy and wild to be doing in the MCU right now, especially since people want the Tom Holland Spidey films to be grounded, is having Spider-Man do the traditional symbiote storyline where it attaches to himself, it obviously has negative effects on him, and then he gets rid of the symbiote. But what if they use what they have introduced in Venom Let There Be Carnage, the connective symbiote hive mind? And what if when Spidey puts on the Venom symbiote suit, it kind of cross-connects to Null. So Null knows that Spider-Man has the Venom suit, and this unbelievable being senses it through the hive mind and it awakens Null. But the issues arise from a lack of motivation. Why would an alien character want revenge on Spider-Man? Why would he even be looking to kill Peter Parker? And that's where the idea starts to crumble, where maybe it's just too big for where Spider-Man needs to be right now. But this then leads me to the two dumbest ideas.
This guy!
The dumbest one for me is definitely having Tom Hardy return for absolutely no reason. Because damn, that guy has been tricked I don't know how many times into thinking his Venom films were gonna finally meet Spider-Man, and it's never going to happen. So it would be kind of funny if after like teeter-tottering Tom Hardy all over the place, he still ends up being Venom in the MCU somehow. I know that's never gonna happen, and they kind of made that clear at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home that Venom is totally not gonna be Tom Hardy. But you never know. Sony's done crazier things. I mean, we all saw Madam Web, didn't we? They're clearly not thinking straight. What I think would be the lamest choice? What if it's just Agent Venom? In the comics, it's usually Flash Thompson, who doesn't really fit this version of the character in the MCU since it's Tony Revolori. And I know this is not gonna happen, but what if Agent Venom is Punisher? Whatever happens in Daredevil Born Again leads Punisher down the route where he discovers the Venom suit and he becomes Agent Venom and uses it as a means of furthering his conquest in protecting the city of New York. But my wildest guess, the one that prompted me to make this entire video, what if Kingpin is Venom? We know that he's having a huge role in the MCU now. With his appearance in Echo and his future appearance in Daredevil Born Again, they are clearly setting up Kingpin to be the big bad of New York City. Kingpin has a huge connection to Spider-Man in the comics, so it only makes sense that they eventually will meet up in a movie, whether it is Spider-Man 4 or the eventual 5th and 6th film. There are currently rumors that Kingpin is probably going to be the linchpin to the creation of the Sinister Six, which would be a pretty great way to end the college trilogy, but the idea of Fisk being Venom kind of makes sense to me in the fact that Fisk is a huge character and he's the only person right now in the MCU that has the literal height and strength of like a comic booky Eddie Brock. Where this starts to fall apart is the fact that Kingpin is very anti-superhero. So him using the symbiote suit to defeat Daredevil and Spider-Man, it's kind of just hypocritical. That's just something he wouldn't do. But if you really were gonna like try to twist it and fit this into the MCU and retcon it in a way, you can kind of play into his hypocriticalness. You could use that as a means of showing that Fisk isn't even playing by his own rules. But then that becomes a problem of like, maybe this is just going too far and you might risk ruining the character that people love. I totally understand why this would be a bad idea. So in the end, the most obvious pick is if they were to do a rebooted version of Eddie Brock, or bring back Matt Gargan and complete the Scorpion storyline that Marvel has pretty much abandoned. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Atomic Vision, leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.
What are like some of the craziest villains that you guys have fought?
An alien made out of black goo once.
Oh, no way. I fought an alien too. On Earth and in space.
Oh.
Yeah, he was purple.
I want to fight an alien.
Surf the web, surf the web.
Shut up, Brock. We don't have time.